Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Developing innovative custom business solutions with Google Apps. My name is Jeff Ragusa. I look after the channel program for Google Apps. And I'm going to be joined in a bit by David Hoff from Cloud Sherpas, who's one of our partners who's done quite a bit of work in this area. So what are we talking about? Specifically in this session, we're talking about developing solutions for business customers who are also customers of Google Apps. And we're talking about customizations, so custom solutions to fit a particular business use case. So those are the underlying threads. Some things that I'd like you to take away. Number one is that developers have the tools to be quite flexible in terms of the business solutions that they're able to create for their customers. And with a little creativity applied, they're really empowered to solve a wide variety of business problems with those customers. Two, customizations can be lightweight. Lightweight in terms of the investment required to ramp up and in terms of the investment required to actually develop customizations. But then we can also attack more complex enterprise scenarios as well. So it really depends on the problem at hand, nature of the problem, and how much energy and investment you want to put into it. And then three, there's a business here. So I mentioned I look after the partner program. We'll talk about our partners, and we'll talk about the role that they play here. And when I say partners, I'm talking about third-party integrators and developers. But you don't have to be a partner to partake and for this to be useful. Certainly, you can be a developer, an end user at a Google Apps organization to extend and customize your Google Apps instance. So brief agenda. We're going to set the table, talk a brief background on Google Apps, and then we'll talk about the bigger picture IT landscape that this all fits into. And then we'll talk about our partners and the landscape there and the role that they play. Then we'll talk about some of the tools that are typically used to customize and integrate Google Apps. And we're not going to go too much in depth on the tools. There are sessions at Google I/O that dive into each of the tools that I'm going to talk about in more depth. I just wanted to to briefly touch on them and really give an idea of the breadth of possibilities here. And then we're going to intersperse that with discussions of some examples of what some of our what we're seeing in the wild, and particularly for illustrative purposes, we'll use our partners and some of the experiences that they've had with their customers. And then, as mentioned, David will come up and we'll go more in depth into an example that Cloud Sherpas, or a scenario that Cloud Sherpas recently had with one of their customers. So let's talk about Google Apps. What is Google Apps? To level set, Google Apps is our suite of business applications for providing employees powerful messaging and collaboration tools. So as a set of tools, it's really anchored on the messaging communication side by Gmail, which acts as the communications hub for users. And then it's anchored on the collaboration side by Google Docs and Google Sites, which acts as a collaboration umbrella, often for teams and projects and so forth. So a set of other tools, all hosted by Google and then accessible by end users and customers through their web browser or any web-capable device. What I want to talk about specifically for developers, a couple of points. First, there's a ton of users on this, over 3 million businesses using Google Apps today and comprising over 30 million active end users. So you have an audience here as a developer, and it's a rapidly growing audience. Also, this suite as a platform is growing pretty rapidly. So we released 218 features last year, and many of these are related to the developer interfaces and tools that are available to you. And then there's the 99.9% uptime SLA. So what this means for developers is you can hitch your wagon to Google Apps and not have to worry so much about the reliability of your dependent components, which is important. So if you want to learn more, get an account, learn more about Google Apps, google.com/a. Another piece of the puzzle here is about 2 years ago, we launched a channel program around this. And because of the economics of Google Apps, this was really designed to attract service-oriented partners who are really involved in handling all aspects of the customer lifecycle. And the design point of the program is really to enable partners and facilitate partners to be able to be the face of the technology and the face of the innovation for their customers. And so we've seen partners embrace this role and use that to create comprehensive solutions for their customers involving multiple products and multiple vendors, and then pulling those together into solutions and then providing consulting and support around that. And then more recently, what we're seeing is a trend toward adding custom development into the mix, where they're building their development skills and then using that to integrate and extend the solutions that they're able to create. And I think this is where the I/O audience in particular is going to be able to play a part and get a leg up. So if you want to partake or learn more about the partner program around Google Apps, google.com/apps/resellers. OK, and then the last piece of the puzzle here is our vision, really, for where we see businesses going. In this world, it's what we call we refer to it as 100% web. And it's this world where applications and data are stored centrally and then served out over scalable multi-tenant infrastructure, delivered out over the internet, and then consumed by users purely through a web browser. And so this vision really allows the end customer and their partners, frankly, to be able to focus on the specific logic and processes to separate that business and move that business forward. We have a set of tools to support this vision. I talked a little bit about Google Apps on the left-hand side there as a suite of applications that you can buy from Google. Over on the right-hand side, in the form of the Google Apps Marketplace, we have a marketplace of third-party web applications, over 300 vendors. And these are web applications that are already integrated in with Google Apps in various ways. And there's a session, I believe, right before this in here that went into depth on the marketplace and how to leverage that. But then in the middle, you have customers are able to create custom applications using the various tools of our development platform. And this is where I'm going to spend the majority of the rest of the time here. We have all these applications on this web platform and served up using HTML as a platform, and then with Chrome and Android and Chrome OS, we provide the tools to be able to access these applications from anywhere and any device. So you put those together, and we have our developers and the resellers and our partner network really in a prime position to drive customers toward this 100% web vision. And they're really playing at least 3 roles in this. First, they're playing the traditional role of a value-added reseller or a managed service provider. And this involves bringing Google Apps as an application suite to their customers and implementing and providing consulting and support around that, as well as sourcing complementary applications from other vendors, for example, from the marketplace, and then building multi-vendor solutions there. Secondly, they're playing the role of systems integrator, where they're using the development tools of our platform to create the custom logic and custom interfaces to tie together applications from Google and third parties into comprehensive solutions. And then third, they're playing the role of the independent software vendor using those same developer tools and building standalone applications. So what we're seeing is a trend where former pure play VARs or service providers are expanding their business, they're growing their developer skills, and they're starting by creating custom integration practices and custom development practices, and then some of them starting to productize that work as well. And there's recurring revenue opportunities across each of these roles. OK, so let's talk now about what are the tools. So the tools that we're seeing typically used by customers and by partners and developers to provide custom logic and then integrate that into Google Apps and create custom solutions. And we'll look at it from the lens of looking at Google Apps and then examining the ways in which you can customize and extend. So one of the first things you need to do, or one of the things you need to do, is to create custom business logic. So an example here would be if you want to code up a custom business process. So for example, approval workflow for procuring office supplies. So a couple different tools that we see typically used. One is Google App Engine, which is a full stack for developing and hosting web applications. And another is Google Apps Script, which is a lightweight scripting framework. Both of these provide the ability to host and develop custom logic on Google infrastructure. And then from there, being able to do various things. And we're going to dive into these tools and go into some examples. But another thing that you'll often need to do is to create a custom user interface. So in the procurement workflow example, what you need to do is an employee needs to be able to go somewhere to browse the tools, to browse what's available, and then to make procurement requests. So we've got, and this could be standalone user interfaces, or it could be custom. It could be actually integrated within the Google Apps user experience. So a couple tools here. Sets of options here. One is gadgets. So gadgets are HTML and JavaScript components that are portable, and you're able to customize the user interface there. Another is Google Web Toolkit, which is a toolkit for creating more complex interactive UI components. Other thing you'll want to be able to do is you want to integrate with Google Apps at the data layer and be able to actually modify and manipulate the business objects underlying Google Apps. And AppScript can certainly help you here, and we'll talk about some examples there. But then also, there's a set of Google Data APIs that pertain specifically to Google Apps and allow you to read and write business objects under Google Apps. And then finally, you want to bring together a more seamless experience for users. You really need to integrate on the administrative level as well. And so you want to be able to share common language around user account store, common authentication systems. And if you have property pages or other ways of configuring your customizations, then you want that to be tied into the app's administrative experience as well. So we'll talk about these things. We'll start on the custom business logic layer. So you saw this yellow icon appearing a bunch in that graphic. So that speaks to the power and flexibility of AppScript. And it's lightweight and easy to learn. I think it's one of the reasons why we're seeing our partners gravitate toward it. So AppScript is a cloud scripting framework, standard JavaScript executed on the server side. It provides the flexibility to automate business logic and multi-step workflows across products. So what can you do briefly with AppScript? Well, first you can host custom logic, as I mentioned. If you can code something up in JavaScript, then you're off and running there. Next thing is you want to be able to trigger that logic. So you can create user interface panels using AppScript, and then surface those panels through something like Google Sites, one of the applications. And then from there, capture user information and validate the user inputs and so forth. Another thing you want to be able to do is to modify and integrate with Google Apps. And so with AppScript, and again, these are JavaScript APIs, you can interact with Google Sites, be able to create sites and pages, Google Docs, be able to update spreadsheet cells, update a user's Google Calendar, and so on and so forth. And then this can also go the other direction. So you can respond to event triggers. So for example, within a spreadsheet form, you can actually trigger your AppScript logic that way as well. And then you also, with AppScript, you're able to interact with internet services outside of the Google Apps realm. So be able to send HTTP requests and send email, make web service requests, and so forth. So look at a couple examples, and then we'll look at some of the other technologies. So Revolval is one of our early Google Apps partners. And as they built up their operation, they found that they were providing this service of training customers, and they wound up having to schedule a volume of these training sessions. And each training session would be in a specific location with a specific trainer and specific trainer skill sets, a language and a time and so forth. And so they put out a form to capture this information, to capture requests from users. But then what happened was they had to manually respond to those form requests and match up and find trainers. So what they did was they addressed this with Google Apps Script end to end. First, they used the UI component creation features to be able to create a custom form, as we see here, actually surface that in a Google site. But this form allows a requester to go in and request a trainer. The AppScript is then behind that Show Trainers button, and what that does is it does a lookup into a spreadsheet, which effectively acts as a database of trainers. So you've got AppScript creating the UI and doing the lookup. And then in response to that, what they do is they show a list of results. On the left-hand side, just an interactive list display, and because there's address information in there, they're able to also show that on a map. So both of these user interface panels and the integration with maps, all done using AppScript. And then the user is able to select a subset of those trainers and send a proposal to them. And of course, sending a proposal, in this case, manifests itself as adding an event to that trainer's Google Calendar. So a really nice example tying together multiple products, and all of the logic and the workflow and the user interface components behind this are all built using AppScript. Another example, NewMind Group is another one of our partners with Google Apps, and they've seen success going vertical into the construction industry. And one of the issues that you have in the construction industry is coordination between subcontractors and contractors, and particularly example around coordinating deliveries. And of course, traditionally this is done offline. So NewMind decided to tackle this with their client, Wadman Corporation. What they did was, again, they created a custom form, which they actually created Google Sites for each of the construction job projects, and then they pushed this form out, and it allows the subcontractor to go in there and submit a request. The form, the UI, is powered by AppScript, and then when you go ahead and make a request, using more script, it sends notifications to the general contractor with a link back to this approval queue, which is another custom UI created using script. The general contractor comes in and is able to view the deliveries, what's pending and what's been approved, is able to modify the request, and then go ahead and approve the delivery. And again, there's AppScript behind this, and basically once it approves, it sends notifications in both directions, and then also updates the shared delivery schedule. So another nice example app script on the UI side and all the logic behind it. Another example, Knowledge and Innovation Network. So this is a member community that uses Google Sites to share documents and share event information amongst their member community. And they hold about 30 or 40 of these events per year. And so what they had, there was Phil Ridout is a consultant for them, and he saw this and decided there has to be a better way of handling the event promotion and registration versus the manual error-prone process that they were using. The interesting point here is that Phil had no JavaScript experience, so he had to learn everything on the fly, including the base language. So what he did was he created this spreadsheet template, which allows event organizers to go in, and he's able to capture event information in a structured way. And then he added a custom menu item on the spreadsheet. So this is powered by AppScript, so you can actually customize and add menu items to a spreadsheet. And that menu item allows the event organizer, again, in a standardized way across events, to be able to take the event information and create a brand new Google Sites landing page for the event, take the event information, push it to an event calendar, and then push out to an announcement feed for the event. And then he's able to handle event confirmation emails and event reminder emails and so forth. So a really nice example, and again, this was Phil's starter project around JavaScript. OK, so leaving AppScript, the other place that you can create custom logic and host custom logic, of course, is App Engine. So App Engine is all about fast and easy development and deployment of web applications, simple administration. There are both Java and Python runtime environments, which allows you as a developer to take advantage of the common libraries and tools and frameworks created for those environments. But then, and similar to AppScript, it allows you to leverage Google accounts for authentication and for authorization. And so what you can do is you can create your custom logic, your custom application. You can restrict access to the individual users or individual employees of a particular customer. And then, like AppScript, you can interact with web services, sending email and HTTP requests and so forth. So developers typically have a choice, and often you can use one or the other of these tools. The way I look at it is AppScript is a little bit more lightweight, and App Engine is a little bit more flexible. So one example is if you have need to create statefulness in your custom application and persist state across requests, App Engine, or persist in-memory caching and that kind of thing, App Engine will give you a little bit more flexibility there. So we'll talk about a simple App Engine example in a second, but I want to flip up to the UI layer. And at the UI kind of building block layer, we have Google Web Toolkit. Web Toolkit is an open source toolkit for building web application UIs, and it's really optimized for performance and for browser compatibility. And the interesting thing here is an increasing number of Google properties are actually using Web Toolkit. And so Google engineers are using this underlying and be able to create their own UIs. Now, I showed this right after App Engine because if you're using the Java version of App Engine, this is a really convenient tool, and a lot of our enterprise developers are skilled with Java. But with Web Toolkit, what it allows you to do is you're actually developing your UI in Java and then compiling that down to JavaScript. So the end distribution is JavaScript and HTML, but the development environment is in Java, and there's actually a plugin for Eclipse that allows you to be able to develop your client project in Web Toolkit, and then right alongside your server, say Google App Engine Java project, and then be able to not only have a nice consistent development environment, but also be able to debug. And it's a really neat way of doing client-server debugging. So a simple example that ties in both of those things, and this is something that will be available to our apps partners soon, if any are in the room here. What we needed was we needed to create effectively a mashup that allowed our apps partners to be able to have an on-demand ticket management system. So allow them to see and modify the tickets that they've submitted to Google, support tickets that they've submitted to Google, as well as the tickets that their customers submitted directly to Google. So this information was available across different systems, and so we had to pull these together. And so what we did was we created an App Engine app with a Google Web Toolkit user interface. And so Google Web Toolkit allows us to create a nice custom user interface to our own look and feel, and with a nice AJAX responsiveness. And then that calls down into Google App Engine, which actually pulls the data from multiple data sources and creates the logic to create the display. Mentioned this earlier, but a nice, certainly in use here, is we leverage Google for authentication and authorization. We leverage Google accounts. In this case, these are our partners that are using this. They already have Google Apps accounts because they're using it to manage their partner console. But if you think about it, any Google Apps customization you do, if the customer is using Google Apps, they're going to have Google accounts. And you want to be able to leverage that. You don't want to have to force them to create a new username and password for your custom logic. Really easy to do that with App Engine. So nice example, and it's a very typical example of Web Toolkit on top of App Engine. OK, another option at the UI layer is gadgets. So gadgets are custom HTML or JavaScript components, so portable web applications that you can then embed in various web pages or in Google properties known as gadget containers. So it really is a way in which you can customize the Google Apps UI through these containers. So I'll talk about a few of them. One of the gadget containers is Gmail. And so a couple different options with Gmail, but one of the things you can do simply is to expose your customer, have your customers install a gadget into Gmail as a sidebar gadget and expose your custom HTML and JavaScript right within the sidebar, the margin of Gmail, which is really convenient, a convenient access point for users who are in Gmail all day long. But another more powerful example is Gmail contextual gadgets. So these are gadgets that actually live within an email itself, and they're triggered to appear based on clues from that email. So like who the email is from, who it's to, the content of the message, and subject, and so forth. And then the gadget within that email can actually use those clues to provide a custom interface display, custom logic, and so forth. So really cool, and we have to look at an example here. So Aperio is another one of our apps partners, and they're also a Salesforce.com partner. So what they noticed with Salesforce CRM, is that it's really great for allowing sales reps to manage their customer information. But those same sales reps are also using Google Apps, and they tend to spend a lot of their time in Google Apps and in Gmail. And so they wanted a way to bring these experiences together in such a way to accelerate decision making and so forth. And so what they did was they created this tool set called CloudWorks, which is really meant to facilitate common interactions between SaaS applications. And what we're looking at here, one of the fruits of this is this Gmail contextual gadget that we're looking at. So this is a Gmail interface that we're looking at. At the top half of the screen is an email that came in. And then the bottom half here is this contextual gadget that is surfaced by CloudWorks. And what it's doing is it's looking at, it appears because of some rule that was embedded around who the email was to and who it was from. And what it does is it actually calls out and looks into Salesforce CRM and then pulls appropriate accounts and opportunities and contacts and so forth, surfaces that information right within the email, and then not only allows the user to see that information conveniently, but also allows them to go ahead and take action right within the email. And it's amazing to the degree to which this can speed up productivity. Really a nice way to streamline business processes and help people get things done. So other types of gadget containers, Google Calendar, similar to Gmail, you can have sidebar gadgets, and you can surface your custom functionality right there, particularly functionality that's temporally relevant. But then also with Calendar, you can have event gadgets. So these are gadgets that are tied to a particular date. And so you can think of them as custom events, essentially, for a user's calendar. And so an example here is that you can integrate a user's calendar with, say, a travel reservation system, and say that the user goes and creates a reservation on that system. Their flight times and so forth show up as events on their calendar. Another example is Google Sites. A lot of the examples I talked about earlier on AppScript was actually using Google Sites. Google Sites has this collaboration umbrella. It's a really popular place to surface user interface components from multiple systems, creating dashboards and so forth. And so we saw some examples where AppScript forms were surfaced through Google Sites. That was using this Sites gadgets framework. And then Google Docs is another interesting piece. So this is particularly Google Spreadsheets. This actually goes the other direction. So you can actually use a spreadsheet as a data source to populate a gadget, and then that gadget becomes a custom visualization of that data. And then you can take that custom visualization and export that out to other websites and properties. So a simple example here is, let's say you have a spreadsheet of addresses. You create a custom visualization, which is essentially a mapping view of those addresses. And then you take that map and you put it out on your website, and now you have a simple store locator, for example. OK, so last thing we'll look at, are we doing on time? Last thing we'll look at is the ability to modify Google Apps business objects. So we talked about Google AppScript quite a bit here, the ability to add events to a user's calendar, for example. But I wanted to touch on the Google Data APIs. So Google Data APIs are REST-based APIs for reading and writing data stored by Google Apps. It's XML sent over HTTP using common HTTP methods like GET and POST. But then that's at the protocol layer, and then there are various client libraries that are built above that in various languages to allow users to use these more conveniently. There's dozens of Google Data APIs, but specifically relating to Google Apps, there's more or less data APIs associated with each of the applications at the application layer. So allowing users to create documents programmatically, to create sites and site pages, to read and write to cells on a Google spreadsheet, to add to a Google user's calendar or update the user's contact list and so forth. And then at the administrative layer, there's a set of options there, including being able to create users, to be able to do usage reporting and things like that. OK, so a quick example here now of the Google Data APIs, particularly the Google Spreadsheets API. And this will actually also touch on Google Web Toolkit and Google App Engine as well. So again, internally within Google, we had this need to create ad hoc performance reports. So reporting on partner performance or product performance or like marketing campaign performance. And so we need to create and run these reports, and then we need to analyze the data in interesting ways, including maybe being analyzed by multiple people. And so what we did was we used Google Web Toolkit to create this ad hoc report builder interface where you can pull the different fields you want to see and the constraints and the format you want to see the results in and so forth in Google Web Toolkit. Then that calls down into an App Engine module, which then calls out into the various data sources, cloud and on-premise data sources, to pull in the data and then churn and actually do the work of generating the report. But then the key part is then from there, what that does is it pushes that report data out to a Google spreadsheet. And this is where the Google Spreadsheets Data API comes in. And the reason why we do that is because now the end user can use the spreadsheet to view the results and take advantage of all the built-in features and functions of Google Spreadsheets, particularly the rich visualization tools, charts and gadgets and so forth, as well as the sharing model, the access control model, to be able to share this report data amongst users. So it's a nice way, tying these things together in a really nice way of not reinventing the wheel. OK, so with that, what I'm going to do is pass it over to David Hoff from Cloud Sherpas. And David's going to go in a little bit more depth on an example customer scenario that Cloud Sherpas recently had.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure. I will wait here.
As Jeff mentioned, I want to give you just a very, very brief introduction into Cloud Sherpas so you can understand the context of our discussion. I think Jeff pointed out that there were kind of three categories: the MSP, the ISV, and the SI. And Cloud Sherpas was founded by myself and a few other partners about 3 years ago, focused on exactly this trifecta. So the ability to provide managed services, the ability to build custom extensions to those services, and the ability to deploy everything seamlessly in an enterprise. So what we wanted to do today is talk a little bit about a project that we started about a year ago for an organization called CHEP. And CHEP is a multinational organization with roughly around 10,000 users. And they came to us as part of their Google Apps deployment and said, we have some large challenges in regards to a SharePoint deployment. We have multiple disparate technologies that are scattered all over the enterprise. And these are all typical on-premise technologies that took a great deal of investment to deploy, but because of the local nature of each of them, they didn't effectively reach the entire organization as a whole. So you can see I've got up here, they had pockets of open text, they had pockets of SharePoint, and they even had localized file servers. So this is one area where, Jeff, we can plus one a little bit to say, you also have the opportunity to integrate things like the Google Search Appliance. So this is another great tool that is in kind of your developer's toolbox of things that can help solve problems. Ultimately, the discussions that we had centered around these 4 or 5 key issues. There was a significant mismatch between the tools that were available and the information that users could access. So IT was needed for very simple requests. If you're on Google Apps, you're already comfortable with the fact that you can go out and within a click or two, you can create a Google site. Within their organization, this was roughly a 2-week process. And it had to go in front of a governance board that consisted of people in different geographies. And it really slowed down the process of disseminating information in the organization. In addition, because of this scale, it made the information become outdated. So it was complex, it was unattended over time. And one of our applications directors there at CHEP had this quote: it was like a large building with no residents. And so we met with them, and we talked about what their vision for the intranet was. And this was the slide that we all kind of ultimately agreed upon. And it was founded out of two things. It was founded out of a vision of what they wanted to see in their intranet, but it was also governed by the reality of what was happening within their organization. So what I mean by that is they had found their users were already using Google Docs and using Google Sites. These were tools that their end users had picked up on their own and found so valuable that they had gone outside the scope of the IT department. So IT had to recognize this and figure out a way, how do we incorporate all of these collaborative tools in a way that we feel comfortable managing it from an information technology perspective. So again, if we start at the bottom of the pyramid, that's where Google Docs comes in. Anybody can go out and create Google Docs. You don't necessarily have to be a part of Google Apps. And this is a great entrance into the technology. When we go live with Google Apps, we now have the ability to bring all that under one umbrella. So it's all within Google Apps. And we get extended functionality with Google Sites. So that's kind of the second tier from the bottom, where we've now introduced this capability to our users to be able to go out and create Google Sites with just a click or two. And this produced a challenge for their IT organization. You know, a group that was comfortable and in control because they could approve and deny the ability to create sites has now kind of lost that. And so during our discussions, we had to back up a little bit and we had to say, why do you want to control these sites? What is the business rationale that makes it valuable for you to be able to have control over these sites? And as we kind of peeled back some of the layers of the onion, it was more a concern that we don't want people creating sites and sharing them externally. We want to have some control over the public image. And the reality is we really don't need to get involved from an IT perspective in the internal creation of content. So you can see about midway up in the pyramid, we start to have a break. And this is where the IT department and the governance committee start to have control over the content. So at the very top, we have things like the corporate intranet. We wanted to have a more structured process within this content so that it's audited, so that it's logged, so that it's reviewed by multiple people before someone goes out and posts, hey, today's a holiday, everybody take the day off. So this was the vision, and this was the result. So do you guys think this is a good-looking Google site? Clap if you want. I personally love it. I think this is a beautiful example of what you can do with Google Sites. So often, people get kind of in the daily grind of just creating a site and not building a template. And they wind up with the left-hand nav, and it just has a very common flavor to it. What we set out to do here was build something that not only was very, very useful, but it was also very visually appealing. And if you were to see this actually live, you would see that there are animations going on. There is an embedded MP3 that gives you a verbal walkthrough of the intranet. You would see that we've got actionable quick links that are in that little drop-down menu. The name of their intranet is Walter, so they gave it a little personalization. And again, this is another opportunity for you as application developers to get involved and to bring some UI skills to make something that is very visually attractive. What we're going to do from here is we're going to dig into some of the content elements that build up this page, some of the gadgets. So we kind of came up with this idea of managed gadgets. How many of you guys in the room could write a piece of JavaScript that said hello world? Okay, so everybody look around at the folks that have their hands up. These are the people that can build you custom gadgets. If you can write hello world in JavaScript, that's all you need to know how to do. And the great thing about that is gadgets are what give you the capability to build dynamic content in Google Sites. It's part of the security infrastructure that you can't just go embedding dynamic stuff in the regular HTML of a Google site. Gadgets gives you that capability and that flexibility. What's also nice about gadgets is they're centrally controlled and centrally managed. So when you work with an organization and they say, you know, perhaps I don't want to see a particular gadget available to my users, right? In a Google Apps environment, we can go turn those gadgets on and off. Furthermore, we can start to create things like private gadgets. Let's say you have a gadget that's an SAP orders feed. You want to be able to take that gadget and you want to expose it to your users. This now becomes kind of a managed gadget within your organization that takes all the complexity out of building, you know, an SAP portlet, if you will, and puts it right into the power and right into the hands of an end user. So the centrally managed feature is a huge value, and really what that provides is consistent content. So if you've ever tried to build a large-scale Google Sites project, you'll notice that that can be a bit of a challenge to have one piece of content that is presented in multiple Google Sites. And that's the ideal situation to use a Google gadget. So if we go out and we create one gadget, we can publish that in multiple sites, and then a single update to the source of that gadget is now automatically disseminated into all the various places that are consuming that content. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. This is the top half of the intranet page that you were looking at. And we're going to dissect it a little bit. We can see, I mentioned that there was an embedded audio file. So in the upper left corner where you see Walter, there is actually an embedded audio player that's available to the user. Right below that, there's the quick links. And again, this is something that is managed centrally. So if they want to update a quick link into any of the applications that are using it, it's going to get published out to all those sites. On the Jim Ritchie's blog corner, this is a flash animation. You might notice the series of, I think, 5 green boxes. It scrolls from left to right with rotating banner announcements through it, promoting different things within the organization. So again, this is just another gadget. In this case, it's a very simple gadget that is really just an iframe. It allows you to bring in some rich visual content into the home page. A little further down, we have breaking news. And again, this is another great way to use gadgets. We publish multiple feeds, so feeds that are contextually relevant to different individuals within the organization. So let's say that I work in a plant in Sydney, and it's a manufacturing plant. I can have news that is tailored to me versus if I'm a truck driver and I work for one of the plants in the Americas. So again, a gadget is a great consumer of that feed. The last one on the top half of this page is called People Search. And we're going to dig a little further into that gadget and kind of how it works. So if you were to look at that same exact page that we just looked at, that above the fold, this is what happens when you throw that same Google site page into edit mode. All you see are gadgets. You see, I think there's 2 hard-coded links at the top. One is to edit your profile information, and the other is to switch to one of the sister companies' intranets. But everything else on this page is dynamic. So you can see the logo gadget that we've got there. Again, a great capability to reuse content. We've got the quick links gadget that I mentioned that allows you to publish URLs, you know, consistently from a central console. The news and the video. And then finally down in the lower right, the people search. And I'm just going to advance a little bit and step into people search. This is, again, one of many of the components that builds out the intranet. And at Cloud Sherpas, we're a pure play Google shop. So pretty much everything we do is using a Google technology. And I think people search touches on just about every one of them. So people search is actually a Google App Engine application. And for the user interface, it uses GWT. This is, again, as Jeff was mentioning, a great user interface technology that gives you a lot of flexibility in presentation between a browser and a mobile device. The great part about all this is that it's reusable. So you saw the one screenshot of it there in the home page of the intranet, but it's also used in other places within individual Google sites, regional sites, and departmental sites. The one area that CHEP came back and they said, we want a very, very robust search infrastructure. And as you know, search comes as part of Google Sites, but the challenge there was a little bigger. In addition to migrating content out of their other repositories into Google Sites, we also had the challenge of their local file systems. And this is where we were able to integrate Google Search, specifically the Google Search appliance, to index all of their local file servers and aggregate and federate all that content with everything that you're seeing here. So when we start talking about search, we can go in and use people search to locate an individual. And as part of the result set, we're also going to see content that is associated with that individual. So part of this is going to be a directory profile about that individual, information that's pulled from Active Directory in this case. Part of it is going to be information that the user has self-edited. So you remember at the very top in the upper right corner of the intranet, there was an Edit My Profile page. And what this allows the end users to do, they can click on that link, and they can fill in some of the information about themselves directly in the directory. Now, we've got several fields that are locked down and not available for the user to edit. But for the ones that they can, it's relatively free form, and they can enter particular skill sets, particular industries, anything about them that might be relevant in the context of a search. So one of the last Google technologies, and I'd highly encourage you guys to take a look at this one. It is something that you can build out of the box in probably about 10 minutes. It's the Google Visualizations API. And we did that to build a dynamic org chart. And if you want, I'd challenge you after the session to go out and create a Google spreadsheet and insert the Visualizations org chart component. And what it'll allow you to do is very quickly take that spreadsheet and display it just as you see here with a dynamic org chart. So it's a very powerful technology, and I'll step in a little further with people search. And again, stick around for questions. We'll have some Q&A at the end of the session. But from a people search perspective, the data flows, everything starts in Active Directory. And from Active Directory, we use a tool that's provided as part of Google Apps called Google Apps Directory Sync. It's a free tool, and it allows a one-way push from Active Directory to your Google user profiles. So if you have an existing set of phone numbers, of fax numbers, of locations, of all this data, using the GADS tool, you can seamlessly push that into your Google user profiles. So that's the first step in the chain. The next step is to take all of that user profile information and feed it into our App Engine application. So here we're using the Google APIs, specifically the User Profile API, to programmatically retrieve all that information that originally started in Active Directory. It moved into Google Profiles, and now we're pulling it into our app. And from there, we expose that information and allow the user to augment it with some additional fields. So they can do direct self-edits of this personal data, and we all have confidence that we're not going to corrupt Active Directory and we're not going to create any infrastructure challenges for the IT team. The last result in this entire chain of events is we take all that information that we've aggregated and we publish it as a direct feed to a Google search appliance. All that results in the search screen that you see down at the bottom, where we've queried for a particular user, and we can start to see their photo, we can start to see their profile information, we can even see content associated with those individuals. We talked a little bit about the pyramid, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of depth here, but I'd highly encourage everyone, there's a session tomorrow that's going to talk about Google Apps Script and workflow processes. And this is essentially what we have here for the Google Sites creation workflow. Again, if you think of the bottom of that pyramid, we wanted to give the ability for users to create Google Sites, but we needed an approval process to promote that site up into the upper echelon of the pyramid. And this is how it's accomplished. So the user goes out and they click a link to get their site approved. In this case, I'm creating a new site from one of the company-approved templates. And this is a nice place to use AppScript. We've got the ability to say, there may be a whole bunch of templates out there, but only a handful of them are sanctioned for use kind of in this upper echelon in the pyramid. So my AppScript reads the templates and filters out just the ones that are appropriate. All of this is routed through email, and the results are actually managed in a Google spreadsheet. And a Google spreadsheet is a great container for keeping all of this information when you're building these workflows. So a couple of lessons learned. In this project, it's essential to involve stakeholders, and it's essential to keep them involved and build a regular release cycle of getting this information out to users. Google Apps is constantly introducing new features, so you need to prioritize what is it that we need to go live, and what are the nice-to-have things that we can roll in, and maybe Google even will release those as native features. Another lesson learned, you're going to be, especially in a large enterprise environment, promoting this content between your various production and staging sites on a regular basis. So make sure you build a consistent process to get that content published, and that's going to facilitate releasing the content on a regular basis. So automate that process, make it easy for everyone, so that when you're ready to say, hey, take a look at the new version, everybody's got it. I mentioned gadgets. Everything in sites that you want to do dynamically is going to require gadgets. So go ahead and invest some time in learning Google Gadgets. Would especially recommend looking at the open social containers. These give you a lot more flexibility. If you haven't started building gadgets yet, it's very easy. Go out and Google it. But you'll see there's an IDE that's right in the browser. So you can actually go to a web page, build a gadget, and start with something simple. Just build a gadget that has quick links or URLs to other applications. An additional lesson learned is register a master user for all of your projects within Google Apps. So create a Google Apps account that's dedicated to owning all of this content. And that way you don't have to worry as much about changes in developers and who's working on what. You know all the security permissions will be accurate for this master administrator. Finally, App Engine is an ideal hosting platform for all of these custom gadgets. So in this organization, they were moving away from on-premise infrastructure. And as you start to build a lot of these gadgets, you need a place to put them. You need a place for those applications to live. And App Engine is perfect for that. It's pre-built and ready to go. And finally, consider and test security at every phase. From time to time, you'll want to understand the security models around a gadget and how the content is displayed in regards to authentication. So in multi-domain environments, this becomes an even more important consideration. Look at your users from the different organizations within Google Apps and make sure that they have access to the content that they need. So again, I appreciate everyone's time, and I think we'll turn it over now to Q&A if you could. There's a microphone back here, And if you could step up to the microphone when you have questions. And
Perfect. Thank you. Or hands. That would work as well.
The question, is this on?
Yep.
Just waiting for the crowd to clear. I think people are smelling food or something. The question I have is about contextual gadgets. There was an indication of custom content extractors, but they're not available, and it's been there forever saying they will be available at some point. Is there any idea of when custom content extractors would be available, that we could write our own?
when you say that custom content extractors should be there now, is there a specific use case?
Well, for example, I might, in an email message, want to extract something out of a header that's not currently available. Currently, I can extract the subject, the from, the to, things like that. But there might be something else I want to extract out of a header. And currently, I'm just limited to the predefined content extractors. But there's a note there on the page that says they will be available at some point, custom, that you can write your own, but I haven't seen any change to that. So I just wondered if there's any word about if developers that will be able to write our own custom content extractors.
It's a good question, and it may be something more for...
Yeah, I mean, I can just say it's certainly these Gmail contextual gadgets, I think they're not, they haven't been in use nearly, we haven't done a really great job of marketing them even to the developer community. I think they're a lot more powerful than people realize. But having said that, and reason, what that means is that we actually are still investing quite a bit in expanding that, and also, so these additional extractors and the ability to do custom content extractors is one kind of axis. Another way is more flexible ways to install and acquire these contextual Gmail gadgets. So there is development work going on. I don't know the specific status of that, but it's actively being built out for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, great example of an intranet. What I was wondering about the statement of the empty building, how did you convince business or the people who had to pay to rebuild everything?
Say that again?
Well, assuming the empty building, I assume everything has been built, but nobody's been using the applications or the existing intranet. How did you get sponsored?
How do we get sponsored?
Yeah.
Actually, that was relatively easy. This particular customer was in the midst of looking at a SharePoint deployment, which had a very, very significant price tag. And in comparison to Google Apps, since Google Apps was already part of the messaging plan, it was essentially a no-cost addition. So it was more about being able to prove to the customer that we could provide all the functionality they needed within the Google Sites container. So they had a list of probably 18 core tenants that they wanted to see, and we took a few days, built up some mock-ups, some wireframes, and some demos, and showed them that yes, we could indeed embed the types of content. Once we were able to do that, they were solely caring about function, and it made the rest of the decisions kind of a no-brainer. But it did take some executive commitment and sponsorship, and I certainly would suggest to everyone that is an area that you want to spend time on, showing people sophisticated sites and getting that commitment from the executive group.
But you did that as a commercial effort, the first demo.
Say that again?
Did you do that as a commercial effort from your company side to do the first initial days, or was that already part of the paid project?
I didn't quite pick on that,
okay.
But...
So you said you have to demonstrate somehow your skills.
Yeah.
Is that part of your commercial offering before you start getting paid, or is that?
Absolutely. So we created, and my internet access is a little slow here, but I could show you the demo site that we created that addressed these 18 core tenants. And we went in front of their governance board. We showed them how in most cases, I mean, I think we had 3 days to put together the demo site. But as we went through it, we showed them how we could address the core requirements. And then for the things that took a little more effort, we kind of scoped out what they would look like and built some wireframes.
That can certainly vary depending on the customer segment. They're working, what was it, 6,000 employee or something company
Yeah.
that Sherpa was? It'll certainly vary. If you're working with a small business, often our partners wind up being the trusted advisor, and it's basically saying, look, here's the way that we can address your business, the business problems or the business objectives that you have. Don't worry about the fact that it's Google Apps and other technologies behind the scenes, but when you're positioned in that as a solution provider, then whether it's bringing the technology to bear and implementing, or it's actually developing custom solutions, it's kind of there's a much more of a gray area there, and so you're able to kind of to build out solutions and make proposals to customers more easily.
And existing content is a great way. So if you build a reference site, because it's Google Sites, it doesn't cost you anything. And you can use that in your sales process over and over again. So, throw a few gadgets in there, make sure people understand and get the vision of what you can do in the platform.
Okay. If there's no more questions, we'll let people go to lunch. But thank you again for joining.